There is a mansion outside Philadelphia that once stood as one of the most magnificent private homes ever built in America. A place so astonishing in its beauty and scale that visitors compared it to the great palaces of Europe. It had a ballroom shimmering with gold leaf, galleries lined with priceless paintings, long marble corridors, domed ceilings, and more than 110 rooms arranged across 70,000 square feet. But today, that same mansion sits in silence. Its windows are cracked, its floors sagging, and its grand halls echo with emptiness. Yet within those decaying walls lives a story of ambition, triumph, heartbreak, and time. This is the full story of Lynnewood Hall, the dream that one family built, the tragedy that reshaped them, and the legacy that still lingers long after their voices fell quiet. In the middle of the 19th century, a boy named Peter Errol Brown Widener grew up far from the world of wealth he would one day command. Born in 1834, he lived a modest life in Philadelphia. His father was a butcher. Money was scarce. There were no fine clothes, no servants, no luxuries. But Peter had something extraordinary, a sharp mind and relentless determination. He worked hard, saved what he could, and looked for opportunities in a world rapidly changing around him. His big break came during the Civil War. With the country dividing and soldiers marching across battlefields, Peter secured a contract to supply meat to Union troops. It was demanding work, filled with logistical challenges and constant pressure, but he managed it with efficiency few others could match. The war ended, but the fortune he built from it did not. With that money, he began investing, and his choices revealed a genius for understanding America's industrial future. He poured money into streetcar lines, believing that cities would expand and workers would need reliable ways to travel. He invested in railroads, steel companies, and tobacco giants. By the end of the century, he was one of the richest men in America, standing alongside the Vanderbilts, Carnegies, and Rockefellers. But Peter did not seek only wealth. He wanted legacy, something monumental, something that would outlast him. And so he turned to Horace Trumbauer, a young architect already gaining a reputation for designing homes that rivaled Europe's greatest estates. Together, they envisioned a palace, a home of perfect proportions, filled with light and built on a scale few could imagine. Construction began in the 1890s. Hundreds of workers shaped limestone blocks, carved intricate wood panels, laid marble floors, installed massive heating systems, and wired electricity through every inch of the home. The result was breathtaking. Lynnewood Hall rose from the Pennsylvania landscape like a neoclassical temple. Visitors entered through towering Corinthian columns. Inside, sunlight poured across polished floors. Long hallways stretched in perfect symmetry. The rooms were vast, the ceilings high, and every detail chosen to project elegance and power. But the true crown of Lynnewood Hall was not its architecture. It was the art. Peter Widener had become obsessed with collecting the finest paintings and sculptures from Europe. He purchased works by Raphael, Rembrandt, and El Greco. He collected tapestries, rare furniture, porcelain, and artifacts that once belonged to royal families. The mansion became a private museum, one of the greatest in the United States. Guests who walked through the galleries spoke in hushed voices, overwhelmed by the beauty around them. Life inside Lynnewood Hall was grand, but not without sorrow. Peter and his wife Hannah raised 3 sons, Harry, George, and Joseph. The family lived with extraordinary comfort, surrounded by art and luxury. But tragedy struck early when their eldest son, Harry, died of typhoid fever in his 20s. The loss left a permanent ache in the family, but they continued on, hosting dinners, attending social events, and welcoming powerful guests into their home. Of the surviving sons, George was the one who most closely followed in his father's footsteps. Charismatic, capable, and deeply trusted by Peter, he was positioned to inherit not only the family fortune, but the responsibility of carrying the Widener name into the future. George married Eleanor Elkins, a woman from another wealthy Philadelphia family. Together they raised their children, one of whom was named Harry in honor of George's late brother. In 1912, George and Eleanor traveled to Europe with their teenage son Harry. They visited museums, attended cultural events, and immersed themselves in the world of art that the Wideners loved so deeply. When it was time to return home, they booked passage on a ship that was the pride of modern engineering. A ship so large, so luxurious, and so advanced that many believed it was unsinkable. Its name was Titanic. The night the Titanic struck an iceberg, the world changed forever. Amid the chaos on deck, George and Harry guided Eleanor to a lifeboat, making sure she was safe. But there was no hesitation, no confusion about what they would do next. They stepped back, refusing to take seats meant for women and children. Eleanor survived. George and Harry did not. The icy Atlantic swallowed them, their bodies never found. Back at Lynnewood Hall, the tragedy shattered the family. The halls that once echoed with laughter and music now felt unbearably empty. Peter Widener, already advanced in years, never fully recovered from the loss of his son and grandson. The mansion, once a monument to triumph, now held a heavy, quiet grief. Everywhere he walked, he saw reminders: a favorite chair, a painting they had admired together, the hall where Harry used to run. 3 years later, Peter died, leaving the estate and much of his fortune to his only surviving son, Joseph. Joseph Widener was a quieter man than his brother. He loved horses, art, and a peaceful life away from the glare of high society. Under his care, Lynnewood Hall remained impressive and orderly. Staff tended to the gardens, polished the floors, and kept the mansion alive. But the world around it was changing rapidly. The Gilded Age was fading. The fortunes of old were strained by new taxes, new cultural expectations, and the sheer cost of maintaining massive estates. Even Joseph, with all his wealth, faced the pressure. The mansion was enormous. The bills were constant. The staff required were dozens in number. Yet he kept it going, honoring his father's legacy and the memory of his brother. But time does not pause, even for the grandest estates. By the mid-20th century, Joseph was growing older, and the world around him no longer resembled the one his father had shaped. The upkeep of Lynnewood Hall had grown overwhelming. New taxes targeted large estates. Staff were harder to find and even harder to keep. Modern life no longer revolved around ballroom dances and formal dinners. The younger generation preferred city apartments, vacations abroad, and a lifestyle that did not require an army of servants to maintain. The mansion had become a relic, beautiful but impractical, and Joseph knew it. Still, he kept the art safe, kept the lights on, and kept the grass trimmed, even as the cost became staggering. When Joseph died in 1943, the future of Lynnewood Hall became uncertain. The Widener fortune, once among the greatest in the nation, had been divided across generations, charitable foundations, and art donations. Much of the priceless collection once housed in the mansion was transferred to museums, especially the National Gallery of Art, which owes a significant part of its early collection to the Widener family. The halls that once displayed masterpieces were left bare, their frames removed, their stories taken elsewhere. Without the art, the mansion seemed even larger and even more hollow. After Joseph's passing, Lynnewood Hall was no longer the private domain of a single family. The property was sold to a religious institution, the Faith Theological Seminary, which hoped to convert the palatial estate into a school. At first, their presence brought life back into the enormous rooms. Students walked through the galleries. Classrooms were set up in the grand halls. Light returned to windows that had been dark for years. But even with all their effort, the seminary soon discovered what the Wideners had known all along. Lynnewood Hall was too big, too expensive, and too demanding to survive without enormous wealth behind it. Leaks appeared in the roof. Heating bills climbed. Maintenance costs mounted with terrifying speed. Within a few decades, the seminary struggled financially, and parts of the mansion fell into neglect. By the 1980s and 1990s, Lynnewood Hall had deteriorated dramatically. Trees grew wild against the limestone walls. Windows cracked under the weight of winter storms. Pipes burst. Floors buckled. Vandals broke in, tagging graffiti across once priceless wood panels. Some rooms flooded, others filled with debris. Local residents began calling it the American Versailles, but the nickname carried a sense of sadness, as if the mansion were a ghost of its former self. Each year, the decline seemed harder to reverse, and those who passed by wondered how such a magnificent creation could be left to decay. Yet even in its ruin, Lynnewood Hall held a certain haunting beauty. Visitors who managed to glimpse inside described a strange feeling, a sense that time had folded in on itself. They spoke of sunlight drifting through fractured windows, casting patterns on dust-covered floors. They described hallways so long they seemed to fade into darkness. They saw the bones of greatness, the columns, the staircases, the carved ceilings, and imagined the world that once existed there. The voices of servants, the music of violins, the murmur of guests stepping out of carriages along the sweeping gravel drive. It was as if the past were trying to speak through the broken plaster and peeling paint. As the mansion decayed, preservationists began to worry. America had already lost many of its great Gilded Age estates. Mansions on Long Island, Newport, and across Pennsylvania had been demolished or redeveloped. They feared Lynnewood Hall could meet the same fate, flattened and forgotten. But a strange thing happened. Instead of disappearing, Lynnewood Hall became famous. Photographers, historians, and urban explorers shared its story online. People called it one of the greatest abandoned mansions in the country. Some described it as a tragedy. Others said it was a masterpiece waiting to be saved. The public fascination grew, and with it came new hope. In the early 21st century, groups dedicated to preserving Lynnewood Hall began forming. They saw potential not just in the architecture, but in the story itself. A story of immigration, ambition, triumph, loss, generosity, and memory. They believed that saving the mansion meant saving part of America's cultural history. Fundraising began. Architects were consulted. Plans were drawn up. Each step was slow, but it was movement in the right direction. People who had never stepped foot inside the estate donated what they could, determined to give this forgotten palace a second chance. The mansion's architecture alone made the effort worthwhile. Horace Trumbauer's design had always been ahead of its time, precise, balanced, and monumental. The facade, with its rows of Corinthian columns, stood like a temple to America's industrial success. The interiors, though weathered, still revealed the original craftsmanship. Intricate moldings, marble fireplaces, wrought iron railings, and grand staircases waited like sleeping giants. Even stripped of its paintings and furnishings, Lynnewood Hall retained a quiet majesty. Rescuing it would mean reviving one of the last surviving palaces of the Gilded Age. But restoring Lynnewood Hall would not be easy. Years of neglect had taken a toll. Water damage had weakened floors and ceilings. Roof tiles needed replacement. Electrical systems were outdated and hazardous. Entire wings required structural reinforcement. Preservationists estimated the cost could reach tens of millions of dollars. And yet, Despite the staggering price, the movement continued. It was driven not by financial gain, but by passion, in the same way Peter Widener had once been driven to collect beauty, and in the way George had once been driven to protect his family. As interest in the mansion grew, filmmakers, journalists, and historians began covering its story. Documentaries showed drone footage sweeping over the decayed estate. Newspapers published articles about its past. Social media posts comparing old photographs to current ones spread widely. People who had never heard of the Widener family suddenly cared about their forgotten home. It became a symbol of a bygone era, a reminder of how quickly fortunes rise and fall, a reminder that even the grandest dreams can crumble if left unattended. Through all this renewed attention, one thing became clear. Lynnewood Hall was not merely a mansion. It was a chronicle of American history written in stone and wood. It told of an immigrant's journey from a butcher's son to one of the wealthiest men in the country. It told of a family shaped by art, culture, and the relentless desire to build something eternal. It told of the Titanic, of lives lost at sea, and of a nation that grieved with them. It told of decline and neglect, but also of hope. Hope that the building could rise again, transformed from a ruin into a monument of remembrance. And as efforts to restore Lynnewood Hall gained momentum, something remarkable happened. People began to imagine what the future could hold. What if the mansion could become a museum, a cultural center, a place where visitors walked the same hallways once traveled by the Widener family? What if school children could learn about the Titanic inside the rooms touched by those it claimed? What if art once again filled the walls? The possibilities seemed endless, and with each passing year, the vision grew clearer. For the first time in decades, the fate of Lynnewood Hall seemed to be shifting toward hope. But before anyone could truly understand its future, they needed to understand its past. Not just the architecture, the fortune, or the tragedy, but the heartbeat of the family who lived there. The people who built it, who loved it, who lost so much, and who left behind a legacy far larger than they ever intended. The story of Lynnewood Hall cannot be told without returning to the beginning, to the moment when Peter Widener first imagined a home that would stand for generations. He had wanted a place that reflected what he believed America offered: opportunity, perseverance, and the chance to rise from nothing. He chose Elkins Park because it was close to Philadelphia, yet far enough to feel like a world of its own. From the highest terrace of the estate, he could look out over rolling fields, winding roads, and the distant city skyline. It was a view that reminded him how far he had come and how far he wanted his family to go. In his mind, Lynnewood Hall was more than a mansion. It was a promise that the Widener name would endure long after he was gone. To bring this dream to life, he hired Horace Trumbauer, a young architect whose quiet demeanor hid a profound talent. Trumbauer studied European palaces, drawing inspiration from the stately symmetry of English country houses and the elegance of French chateaux. He imagined Lynnewood Hall as a kind of American Versailles, a place where art and architecture worked together to tell a story. Construction began in the 1890s, and what rose on the grounds was extraordinary. The limestone facade stretched more than 300 feet across. Rows of Corinthian columns supported massive porticos. Dozens of chimneys pierced the roofline like stone spires. Even before entering, visitors understood that this was no ordinary estate. It was a physical expression of ambition. Inside, the effect was even more dramatic. The Great Hall, with its towering ceilings and marble floors, welcomed guests into a world of luxury. Sunlight poured through tall windows, casting shadows across carved moldings and polished surfaces. The art gallery, nearly the length of a city block, held paintings that would later be valued in the hundreds of millions. The dining room, designed for formal dinners and gatherings of powerful people, featured long tables that could seat dozens beneath glittering chandeliers. Even the servants' quarters were large and well-constructed, a sign of the Widener family's belief that a smooth-running household required comfort and dignity for its workers. Every detail, from the fixtures to the furniture, reflected the meticulous eye of a family that valued taste as much as wealth. For a time, Lynnewood Hall was a place of warmth and celebration. Holidays were grand affairs filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses. Visitors described the estate as breathtaking, a home that seemed almost too perfect to be real. The Widener children rode horses along the estate paths. Guests strolled through gardens planted with roses and lined with stone balustrades. Inside, the walls displayed masterpieces by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Raphael, and other luminaries. To see such works outside a museum was rare, and being invited to the estate became a mark of social prestige. Political figures, foreign dignitaries, and leading artists walked the hallways, discussing everything from global events to the future of American culture. Yet beneath the grandeur, the family faced challenges familiar to many who experienced rapid wealth. Peter Widener, though proud of his success, often worried about how his children and grandchildren would use the fortune he worked so hard to build. He believed in discipline and responsibility, qualities shaped by years of survival during the Civil War and his early struggles in Philadelphia. He feared that future generations, raised in opulence, might lose sight of the values that had lifted the family up. This tension between wealth and responsibility lingered quietly in the halls of Lynnewood, an unspoken reminder that fortune can be both a blessing and a burden. The turning point came in 1912 with the tragedy of the Titanic. The ship, marketed as unsinkable, had been a symbol of modern engineering and luxury. Many of the wealthiest families in the world had boarded it, including the Wideners. When disaster struck, it shattered not only lives but the sense of invincibility that defined the Gilded Age. George Widener's death, along with his young son Harry, sent shockwaves through the family. Eleanor's survival brought relief, but the shadow of loss hung heavily over her for the rest of her life. The grief felt by the Wideners was overwhelming, and Lynnewood Hall became a quieter place in the years that followed. Rooms once illuminated by laughter now felt dimmer. The grand spaces seemed too large for a family carrying so much sorrow. After Peter's death in 1915, Joseph inherited not just the mansion, but the responsibility of maintaining it. He tried to keep the estate alive, hosting events and continuing to care for the art collection. But the world was changing. The era of great estates was fading. The economic pressures of the 1920s and the hardships of the Great Depression made it clear that even vast fortunes could be strained. The family's art became one of its most valuable legacies, ultimately donated to national institutions where it could be preserved and shared. Though this decision helped secure the Widener name in American cultural history, it also stripped Lynnewood Hall of some of its soul. The once vibrant galleries now felt like hollow reminders of what had been. After the seminary years and decades of decline, the mansion's story grew increasingly complex. Some local residents saw it as a haunted relic, a place too large and too broken to ever be restored. Others saw potential, imagining a future where the halls once again echoed with life. Explorers who managed to step inside described scenes of strange beauty, vines twisting through shattered windows, fallen plaster revealing laths behind the walls, and sunlight catching on the edges of old banisters. They felt, in the silence, the presence of the people who had once lived and worked there. In the stillness, Lynnewood Hall seemed to breathe, as if waiting for someone to hear its story. Efforts to save the mansion gained momentum slowly but steadily. Preservationists hosted tours, raised funds, and shared the estate's history online. Architects evaluated structural needs, estimating the time and cost required to stabilize and restore the building. Community members rallied behind the cause, seeing the estate as a symbol worth protecting. For younger generations, who had grown up seeing the mansion only from the outside, the possibility of stepping inside felt like opening a time capsule. They wanted to see the staircases their grandparents had spoken about, the rooms that had inspired local legends, and the windows that once looked out over sweeping lawns. Saving Lynnewood Hall became more than a preservation project. It became a mission to reconnect with history, a chance to honor the Widener family's contributions to art, culture, and industry, a chance to reclaim a piece of America's architectural heritage, and more subtly, a chance to reflect on the fleeting nature of success. The mansion's condition served as a reminder that even the greatest achievements can crumble if neglected, and that beauty, no matter how grand, requires care. As restoration discussions continued, people began considering what the mansion could become in the future. Some envisioned a museum dedicated to the Gilded Age. Others imagined an art center where concerts, lectures, and exhibitions would bring life back to the grand halls. A few dreamed of weddings, galas, and formal events returning to the estate, echoing the splendor of its earliest years. Whatever the future holds, most agreed that Lynnewood Hall deserved more than abandonment. It deserved attention, love, and the chance to tell its story in full. In recent years, the push to restore the estate has accelerated. Grants have been pursued. Volunteers have been organized. Engineers have surveyed the property. Most importantly, the public has maintained a growing interest in the mansion's fate. People who had never heard of the Widener family now follow updates online. They watch drone videos, study floor plans, and celebrate each small victory, from repairing a roof to clearing overgrowth on the grounds. Piece by piece, the estate is slowly being brought back from the edge. And perhaps the most powerful part of the story is this: Lynnewood Hall has survived. Despite storms, neglect, vandalism, and financial hardship, it still stands. Its walls remain strong. Its foundations hold. Its windows, cracked and weathered, still look out over the same landscape the Wideners once knew. The mansion has refused to disappear. It has waited quietly and patiently for someone to see value in its weathered stones and silent halls. It is a place where memory lingers, where past and present meet, and where the echoes of history whisper through every corridor. Even in its battered state, Lynnewood Hall continues to hold the essence of what it once represented. People often say that certain places have a soul, and if that is true, then this mansion carries one shaped by ambition, creativity, loss, and resilience. When you walk through its empty rooms, you can almost feel the layers of time pressing close around you. You can imagine the echo of footsteps on marble floors, the distant murmur of conversations during grand dinners, the rustle of gowns as guests moved through the halls, and the quiet sighs of servants going about their work before dawn. You can sense the pride of the family who built it, the sorrow they endured, and the fragile hope that flickered through the decades that followed. To truly understand Lynnewood Hall, one must imagine it at its height. Picture carriages rolling up the sweeping drive as lanterns glow from the windows. Picture Peter Widener standing near the entrance, greeting statesmen, industrial titans, and European nobility as they arrive for an evening of conversation and music. Picture the servants preparing roasted meats, pastries, and trays of delicacies in kitchens large enough to rival those of royal palaces. Picture the art gallery shining under electric light, the masterpieces drawing gasps from those who saw them. The mansion was not merely a home. It was a stage where American wealth, creativity, and culture performed their grandest act. But as with all stages, the performance eventually came to an end. When the last members of the Widener family left the estate, they left behind rooms that once held memories too painful to revisit. Many of the household staff who had served for decades moved on to other work, carrying with them stories of a world that no longer existed. The gardens, once trimmed with precision, began to grow wild. The fountains dried up. Curtains that once shimmered in the sun grew brittle and faded. Even the grand staircase, a symbol of the mansion's elegance, stood in dim light as dust settled over the banisters. During the years when the seminary occupied the mansion, the building served a very different purpose. Students studied theology in rooms where priceless paintings once hung. Sermons were delivered where dinner parties were once held. The collision of old luxury and new austerity created an atmosphere unlike anything the Wideners could have imagined. But the costs of heating and maintaining the enormous structure drained the seminary's finances, and by the time they left, the mansion was already showing deep signs of strain. Roofs that had protected the estate for nearly a century could no longer keep out the rain. Sections of plaster crumbled from ceilings. Water seeped into the structure, weakening beams and warping floors. What had once been a palace was slowly transforming into a ruin. Still, even ruins have a way of inspiring awe. When photographers began documenting the interior, they captured images that stunned viewers around the world. A once grand ballroom filled with debris. A gallery stripped of art, yet still magnificent in its proportions. A library whose shelves stood empty, but whose carved wood remained a testament to craftsmanship. Each photograph felt like a window into a forgotten time, a glimpse of a world slipping away. People responded not with indifference, but with fascination. It was as if the mansion itself was calling out to be remembered. As awareness grew, so did the desire to act. Local organizations and national preservation groups began working together to explore the possibility of saving the estate. Experts evaluated the structure, determining what could be restored and what needed replacement. Estimates were drawn, revealing the staggering costs required to revive the mansion. Yet those numbers did not deter the growing movement. Instead, they seemed to strengthen it. People understood that places like Lynnewood Hall come along only once in a century. They recognized that preserving it was about more than saving a building. It was about saving a story, a chapter of history that spoke to the dreams and struggles of generations. The mansion's story also resonates because it reflects a universal truth. Everything in life, no matter how grand, is temporary. The Wideners built Lynnewood Hall believing their legacy would last forever. They filled it with art, music, and celebration. They walked its hallways with pride, knowing it was one of the greatest homes in America. Yet even their immense wealth could not prevent the tides of time from changing. The tragedy of the Titanic reshaped the family. Economic hardship reshaped the era, and neglect reshaped the mansion itself. The rise and fall of Lynnewood Hall mirrors the rise and fall of countless dreams across history, reminding us that permanence is an illusion, and that all we can do is preserve the memories left behind. What makes Lynnewood Hall extraordinary is not only the tragedy woven into its walls, but also the hope that continues to surround it. The idea that a building so damaged, so worn, and so forgotten could once again be filled with light inspires people. It makes them believe that restoration is possible even after decades of decline. It suggests that beauty can return, that stories can be revived, and that forgotten places can be reborn. Every time someone contributes to a restoration fund, shares a photograph, or speaks about the mansion's history, they become part of its future. They help ensure that Lynnewood Hall does not disappear into the shadows of the past. Imagine, for a moment, what the mansion could become. Visitors walking through restored galleries, learning about the Widener family's role in shaping American culture. Students studying architecture and preservation, tracing their fingers along newly repaired moldings. Couples taking wedding photos beneath the same columns that greeted guests more than a century ago. Concerts filling the halls with music once again, echoing across the marble floors. It is not difficult to picture these scenes, because beneath the ruin, the structure remains strong. The foundation is solid. The proportions are perfect. The beauty, though faded, is undeniable. As the restoration continues, each repaired wall and each replaced window becomes a victory. Each small improvement is a promise that the mansion's story is far from over. The people working on the project often say that they feel a connection to those who originally built the estate. They know that the craftsmen who carved the wood panels and shaped the stone columns more than a century ago never imagined their work would be admired again in a new era. Yet here we are, ready to honor their labor by giving the mansion a new purpose. In the end, Lynnewood Hall is more than a relic of the past. It is a bridge between generations. It invites us to look back at where we came from and forward to what we can become. It reminds us that even when buildings crumble and families fade, the stories they leave behind can endure. And as long as there are people willing to listen, to remember, and to care, those stories can shape the future just as powerfully as they shaped the past. The halls of Lynnewood Hall may be quiet now, but they are not silent. They wait. They wait for footsteps, for voices, for life to return. They wait for the moment when the doors open wide and light floods in once more. They wait for a new generation to walk through their corridors and feel the same sense of wonder that visitors felt more than 100 years ago. They wait for their story to continue, not as a tale of ruin, but as a testament to resilience. And so we come to the final chapter of this story, not as an ending, but as a beginning. When people talk about Lynnewood Hall today, they no longer speak of it only as a ruin. They speak of it as a survivor, a place that has waited patiently for more than a century for someone to give it breath again. A place that, despite everything it has lost, still stands with dignity. When you look at the exterior, the cracked windows, the peeling paint, the vines creeping up its stone walls, you might think the building is beyond saving. But walk inside, and you'll see something different. You'll see a structure that refuses to give up. You'll see staircases still holding their shape, marble floors still glowing beneath the dust, ceilings still arching overhead with quiet strength. You'll see the bones of an American masterpiece waiting for restoration, waiting for purpose, waiting for life. The people who work to save Lynnewood Hall often describe a moment they all experience, a moment that changes their relationship with the mansion forever. It usually happens the first time they step into the Great Hall. They stop walking, they stop speaking, they simply look up. For a few seconds, the years of decay seem to fade away, and what remains is a glimpse of the mansion as it once was, a space overflowing with light, beauty, and ambition. For many, that moment is enough to spark a lifelong devotion to preserving the estate. They see not just what the building is today, but what it can become tomorrow. They see potential, possibility, and hope. Lynnewood Hall's story also challenges us to think about our own legacies. What do we leave behind? What endures after we are gone? The Widener family built a mansion meant to last forever, yet the world changed faster than they could imagine. Their wealth faded. Their fortunes shifted. Their lives took unexpected turns. And still, the home they built remains. Not as they intended, but as history shaped it. A place shaped by celebration and tragedy, by neglect and determination, by time and by memory. It asks us to consider how fragile even the grandest achievements can be, and how important it is to cherish the things that truly matter: family, stories, and the desire to build something meaningful. Imagine walking through the mansion decades from now, after restoration has been completed. The floors gleam once more under the glow of chandeliers. The windows are clear, letting sunlight pour into each room. The gardens bloom again, filled with roses, hedges, and the sound of rustling leaves. The gallery walls display photographs, documents, and artifacts that tell the full story of the Widener family, their triumphs, their heartbreaks, their connection to the Titanic, and their role in shaping America's cultural landscape. Visitors listen as guides describe the mansion's architecture, the artisans who built it, and the history that unfolded within its walls. Children gaze up at ceilings carved more than a century ago. Couples take photos beneath restored columns. Students sketch the intricate detailing, and the mansion breathes again. Places like Lynnewood Hall remind us that preservation is not just about protecting buildings. It is about protecting identity. It is about remembering the people who shaped our world and honoring the lessons they leave behind. It is about acknowledging that even when something appears lost, it can be found again through effort, care, and community. The mansion may have been abandoned, but it was never forgotten. And that, more than anything else, is why it still stands today. What makes this story truly powerful is that you are now part of it. By learning about the mansion, by understanding its history, by supporting its future, even simply by listening to this story, you become a steward of its legacy. You carry the memory forward, and in doing so, you help ensure that Lynnewood Hall will not vanish into the past, but instead rise toward a new chapter. Your interest, your curiosity, and your appreciation make a difference. They breathe life into the halls that have waited so long for footsteps to return. If you were to stand on the front lawn of Lynnewood Hall right now and look up at its massive facade, you might feel something stirring in the air, a quiet sense of endurance, a feeling that the building is holding on, waiting for restoration to finish what history interrupted. You might feel the presence of those who built it, those who lived there, those who grieved there, and those who struggled to preserve it. You might feel a connection to all the lives touched by its existence, and you might realize that although the mansion has changed, its spirit has remained the same. In the end, Lynnewood Hall is not simply a place, it is a story about ambition and courage, a story about loss and recovery, a story about the rise and decline of one of America's greatest families, a story about the brilliance of artisans who carved beauty into stone, a story about how history leaves its mark on buildings and how buildings leave their mark on history. It is a story still being written, one restoration, one memory, one visitor at a time. As the sun sets behind the mansion, shadows stretch across the lawns, where garden parties once danced in golden light. The breeze whispers through the broken windows, carrying the echoes of the past. And if you listen closely, you might hear more than silence. You might hear the laughter that once filled the ballroom. You might hear the clatter of carriage wheels on the driveway. You might hear the soft murmur of guests admiring the art. You might hear the heartbeat of a home that refuses to be forgotten. Lynnewood Hall stands today as a monument not only to the Widener family, but to the resilience of history itself. It teaches us that beauty can fade, but never truly disappears. It teaches us that even after decades of decline, there is always hope for renewal. It teaches us that the past is never lost as long as someone chooses to remember it. And it invites us to look at its weathered walls and see not what has been destroyed, but what can be rebuilt. So as we close this story, imagine the mansion not as it is now, but as it may one day be again. Imagine light returning to its windows, voices returning to its halls, and life returning to its rooms. Imagine a future where Lynnewood Hall stands restored, not as a relic of the past, but as a living testament to history, art, memory, and the enduring power of the human spirit. And imagine yourself there, walking through its doors, becoming part of the next chapter. Because Lynnewood Hall is not finished. Its walls are still standing, its story is still alive, and its greatest chapter may still be ahead.